Hello, I'm Joan Landis, and today we're going to be talking about the difference between falling in love and growing in love. So a lot of the distressed couples that I meet have some sadness in their life because their relationship is kind of on a rocky type of footing. And part of the distress sometimes is the idea that I simply don't feel like I'm in love anymore. I don't feel like I used to, and I certainly don't feel like I did when we were falling in love and courting, okay? So I try to explain to my clients that there is a really big difference between falling in love. So think of those little helicopter seedlings, you know, that come from trees, and just think of them falling off the tree and whirling around, right? And that's kind of like falling in love. And the interesting thing about falling in love is, you know, it's kind of exciting, and it almost sometimes can feel accidental and just kind of spontaneous. It just happened, that you don't have a whole lot of control about the journey. So here's this thing, this little seed falling, and, you know, a little helicopter seed falling down, that you're in such a kind of a whirl, kind of that Twitter-pated thing that, you know, it's really hard to see anybody else except just that person in front of you. And so your family might be trying to tell you something, or, you know, and you just cannot see it. You're just, this person is the only focus that you have. And it's exciting. And so falling in love is that stage that really kind of gets you together, right? But what happens is with falling in love, it is necessarily time limited, okay? That phase of love does sometimes, it ends, okay? And think about a seed that's falling from a tree. It goes on for a while, and then sooner or later, it does hit the ground, okay? So when that seed hits the ground, when that falling in love hits reality, couples have about 4 options at that point that I see. The first one is to say, you know, I don't feel like I did before. I must not be in love. So sayonara, I'm going to go find somebody else that I can have that, you know, that same type of feeling and experience with. And unfortunately, a lot of people do that. They think that that is the limit and extent of love. And if you don't have that feeling anymore, that somehow it's a deal breaker. So people like that become kind of, you know, serial spouses, serial affairs. You know, they keep going from one to another person, trying to recapture that excitement again. And the problem with that is then you never properly attach to anybody, and you have just a string of failed relationships in the wake of your life. And it's really not satisfying. It's tragic. So that's the first option that people have when they hit reality, okay? The next one is to say, wow, okay, well, we're not feeling like that anymore. How do we recapture that? And so maybe we're going to start going on bigger, more expensive vacations, have better food, have more wild sex, you know, and buy more expensive clothes and cars, and just it really, you know, focus on the hedonistic aspects of pleasure to try to increase that rush that you have because you're not feeling it anymore. So sometimes that can go into drug use, substance use, and things like that. So the problem with that, of course, is I don't care, you know, how many golden airplanes you can afford. At some point, it's just never enough. It won't satisfy you, and you'll hit capacity, and you'll just not enjoy it anymore. Or you get into something that's actually dangerous or unhealthy because you've kind of spiraled into patterns trying to, you know, stimulate that physical pleasure. So that's option number 2. I don't really promote that one. Option number 3 is to kind of get cynical and resigned and say, well, you know, my mom and dad were kind of, you know, I don't know. They were kind of like roommates. It didn't feel like they had a whole lot of love in between them, but they survived, and maybe that's the best I can do. Maybe that is love in the long term, And that's sad, isn't it? Because we don't want to resign ourselves to something that isn't loving and joyful and wonderful. So I don't espouse that one either. Okay, then you have the fourth option, and that is that seed hits the ground, that infatuation hits reality, and depending on the kind of soil that it hits will help to determine what kind of growth that seed is going to produce. Okay? So if you've got basically healthy soil, rich soil, fertile soil, and the soil is those things that can create trust, right? So if you're basically an honest person, if you're basically not super reactive and vindictive, if you have a secure attachment style, all of those good things are healthy soil for that seed, that seed of a falling in love to grow into a really amazing tree of love. So you have falling in love, and that's important, but that just sets the stage and is the seed for growing in love. Okay, growing in love. Let's talk about that now. Growing in love feels different than falling in love. Think about it. You're fighting gravity, right? It's not just this, woo, butterflies in your stomach. You're fighting gravity. It's slower, right? It requires change, right? When you're falling in love, you really don't have to change much about yourself. It just kind of happens. You either like each other or you don't. If you don't, you get out of Dodge. But growing in love says, hey, I want to make this relationship work. What do I get to change? I want to know what I get to change in order to become a better person so that I have more capacity to love and more capacity to inspire trust and all that. So, your growing in love is slower. It feels different because it's fighting gravity, not just falling spontaneously. It requires change. And the other thing is it can grow really forever. There's no limit. With falling in love, that is necessarily time limited. You will end that thrill that kind of got you together, okay? But that is not a tragedy. I don't want my couples to say, oh my gosh, I really wish we could have that again. I don't want you to look at it like that. I want you to say, that served its purpose. It got us together. And I don't want to try to replicate that the rest of my life. And when we grow in love, we're going to discover things that actually are more thrilling and more joy producing, which is different than just, turned on. More joy producing over the long haul. And this tree of love can grow and grow and grow and become huge. And maybe this decade you grow in this direction, maybe this decade you grow in this direction, and it can create this amazing trees with this fruit, this amazing fruit, and creates this huge canopy to shade and protect the next generations, who are the little seeds who fall on that little soil. And they need to look at mom and dad and grandma and grandpa and say, wow, you guys did it. How did you do it? Help us understand. And thank you for providing the shade. So when we're just starting out, we have a little support and a little space there where we can try to figure it out before we give up. And so growing in love is, the possibilities are so much more amazing than the infatuation of falling in love. Now, that doesn't mean that in growing in love, you can't have some great vacations and some celebration sex and all of that. You can incorporate that into your growing in love tree, okay? But don't eternally seek after that same feeling, okay? Because that really is chasing after a mirage. It really is. The way our brains work is that when they're overloaded with stimulus, whether it's drugs or pornography use or whatever, is that our brains tend to prune back some of our neural networks so that it doesn't get overstimulated. And that's part of what causes the habituation, where it's like, wow, this hit of cocaine just doesn't do it for me anymore, right? And so, you've been married for 2 years and you're like, when I look at him, I don't have that Twitter-pated thing anymore, okay? It's kind of the brain's way of saying, let's preserve things so that we're not always hitting, the top of our ability to deal with stimulation. And that's actually a good thing, okay? Because we want to be a steady influence for growth and not, woo, 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 woo. That's not a good way to grow. And so really it's like Mother Nature is saying, we have this part to get you together, and once you're together, then we want you to do the important work of creating those long-term relationships, not of just the thrill, but the thrill and the joy and the growth and the progress and becoming a more well-rounded, more loving person, right? So I hope this has been helpful to you to kind of see the difference and to kind of see maybe where you are in your journey of love. If you've had an affair or something like that, it does feel like that this tree has just been whacked off, doesn't it? And so when couples come into me with that much distress, we're basically starting with, okay, we got some roots here. The whole top has been lopped off. What do we do with that? How can we nourish it? How can we be patient with it and regrow this love in the soil, healthy soil that creates trust and those types of things? So that's a whole nother discussion. But, I want you to look at your relationships, either a couple's relationship or even a relationship with a good friend, because this kind of happens with friends too. When you're first getting to know each other, it's like, oh, so cool. And then, after 10 years, it's like, this is good, but it's not like, quite as exciting. That's fine. That's how relationships work. And it's perfect. So get on the forums and tell us, what stage some of your relationships are in, and maybe what things you'd like to think about doing to grow that love in really amazing areas, and not necessarily pine for something that is a little tricky to capture over the long term. So, all right, it's been wonderful being with you, and we'll see you soon. Thanks. Bye.